I find it really strange that people aren't able to make the distinction between regimes and populations.
Well, the whole thing is insane.
Why, if you're angry with the Putin regime, okay, but why would that automatically make you say that you hate Russians?
But also compared
There's 140 million of them. You can dislike Macron and like French people. Why can't people make the distinction? Why do you have to be at war with an entire population just because you don't like the regime?
It's insane, but moreover, I can like or dislike anyone I want. Because I'm an adult man and I'm not a slave, so I can have any opinion I want.
We discriminate by nature. It's in our nature to discriminate.
But also, it's my birthright. Like, you can't tell me who I have to like and dislike.
No.
And I'm not going to submit to that. Last night we were talking at dinner and you expressed some views and I thought to myself, I'm eating with a conspiracy theorist.
Well, I think if you're not a conspiracy theorist by now, you're not paying attention.
You are often described that way. Does it rattle you?
Well, there was probably a time when it would have done, but I've gone through this process in the last 4 years of realizing that I spent the first 50-some years of my life believing and trusting a certain worldview.
Yes.
That with COVID and everything thereafter, all of that fell apart. It's like picking a thread on a tapestry. The whole thing just fell away into, and once you lose all of the things that you had taken for granted and trusted, then I suppose almost by definition you're in territory that others who aren't on the same path as you would call conspiracy theorist. But it's really just, you think, well, if I think now that they were lying to me about that and that and that, were they telling me the truth about anything at all?
Yes.
And you're aware that some of it must be true, but it's early yet. I've only been in this revelatory process. You know, the scales have only fallen from my eyes. My naive trust that I placed in the establishment and in the institutions that I had placed in them without really thinking about it terribly much.
Well, you were part of the establishment. You worked for BBC.
Well, I worked for BBC in as much as I was doing contract work for BBC.
Yeah.
So, but I was never directly employed by the British Broadcasting Corporation. I was, I'd be brought in to do a project, and a production company would pitch a project. I would be the presenter that was associated with that project, and I would be paid by the day for the duration of the project, and then I wouldn't be working for the BBC.
I'm just saying that people watched you on BBC.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. I wrote a column for the Sunday Times in Scotland. I had been for a while the president of the National Trust for Scotland. I was at one stage I was a fellow of the Royal Society of Edinburgh. So I was certainly associated with and part of the infrastructure of the establishment. That's absolutely the case. But I did all of it. I hold my hands up and say I did it in a naive way, without really interrogating the integrity of those institutions. It was just.
Oh, I'm not judging you. I've been there.
I just trusted that. Well, I've always been a political atheist.
Yes.
Struggling to vote in general elections, but usually trying to vote for someone to make plain that I was taking part in the democratic process. But I've never been affiliated to any political party, any ideology. But I think I thought that the powers that be had mine and my family's interests at heart, whether they were red or blue,
of course,
or whatever. I thought basically they're going to keep the lights on. They're going to make sure that there's food in the supermarkets. They'll maintain the roads. There'll be schools open. There'll be a hospital if my family needs it, regardless. But now I just don't feel... I now know that the establishment doesn't have mine or my family's interests at heart. And that's hard. It's like a grieving process, I think.
Yes.
The analogy I would make with that, the 5 stages of grief that we're supposed to go through: the shock, the denial, the bargaining, the
anger,
the various stages that you're supposed to go through. I'm probably 4 years in, just coming to that point where I'm making peace with the fact that I it's my responsibility that I didn't see the reality.
Yes.
That's me. So for a while I was angry with them, and I still am angry with them, but baddies are just baddies. You know, baddies do what baddies do. My problem is that I feel, that it's my fault. I should have seen that. I should have.
I'm with you 100%.
I should have understood.
How could I have been so stupid? So I just think it's really interesting that there's an overwhelming amount of evidence to support what you just said, that the people in charge do not have your or your family's interests at heart at all. In fact, they're working against those interests day and night for whatever reason. I don't think any honest person can deny that at this point, 4 years in. Why? Well, compound question. What percentage of your friends in 2020 arrived at the same conclusions you have arrived at? And what's the difference between you and those who didn't admit what was happening?
I would say I've lost touch with everyone from before, really.
Everyone.
Well, you know, I'm still my family, and that's, you know, the family into which I was born, and also my married family, my in-laws. We've all remained as close as we ever were, although, you know, there were differences of opinion about what COVID was, about the products, the jabs, and so on. So there were differences of opinion, but it didn't cause any ill feeling or any schisms there. So those people are still fully. We're still. That's all very loving and close.
Yes.
But work colleagues, friends, you know, people that I had known in some instances from university days, people that I had worked beside. Broadly, I've lost touch with all of them. There's a handful of people. There's literally, count on the fingers of one hand the people that, as it turns out, ended up with all of the same suspicions and have ended up every bit as conspiracist as me. But as I'm sure you would testify, well, I don't know. I'm not going to prejudge your experience. But those people that I parted company with, that void has been filled. That vacuum drew into it a whole other cast of people, in many cases very unlikely and unexpected. It was Trudy and I, my wife and I, we would laugh about, you know, who are you on the phone? Who have you just come off the phone from now? And I would say, and it would seem so bizarre and so unlikely. People that a few years ago I would never have imagined I would ever have a conversation with, not for any particular reason, but I just didn't expect to be pulled into their orbit or them into mine. So I've been through this process of shedding one carapace, feeling very exposed, I suppose, like something that has cast out, like a crab without its shell until the shell hardens again. You know, so very raw, nerves jangling. But now that it's forming again, and I would say, I suppose, to torture that analogy a little bit, I feel a little bit bigger. You know, I feel as if I have grown, because I wouldn't go back. If I could press a button and make the COVID debacle not have happened, I wouldn't, because what I've learned and what I feel I now understand, or at least that which I think I now have enough wit to ask the relevant questions to better understand, I wouldn't exchange where I was for where I am now. So
back to a shallow, dishonest life.
And I lost all those affiliations that I had, you know, because of the kind of television persona that I had when I was making soft history and archaeology documentaries. You get invited to be patron of this, representative of that. You know, just people want affiliation with you. So, you know, I was connected to Combat Stress, which was a veterans charity, and I was connected to the Association of Lighthouse Keepers. And
is that a big one in Scotland?
No, it's a very fringe little group that people that look after the lighthouses.
Group, yeah, the lighthouse keepers.
And as I say, you know, I had an agent, and I had a column in the Sunday Times. I had been the president of the National Trust. I was a fellow of the Royal Society, and all of that's I'm not anymore. I'm not any of those things anymore. They all distance themselves from me, one by one, like dominoes toppling, and it hurts at the time, or the first one does, like the first punch in the face. You know, you never get, you know, every punch you get thereafter is sore, but it doesn't have the shock value of the first one. And so once I parted company with the one, Oh yeah, I can see that coming. And it's just a process that I'm glad to be on. For me, for us, my family.
I think of this as the great sorting. I mean, under this immense downward pressure exerted on the West over the last 4 years, people sort of wound up on one side or the other, and it's not a clean political divide. It's not even a political divide, as you've pointed out. It's not left, right, Labor, Tory, whatever. But I've never figured out, and I've thought about it a lot, what is it in people that compelled them to move to one side or the other, particularly to the side you're on? You said it's unlikely people you never thought you'd be talking to. Like, what do they all have in common?
It's a question that, Trudy and I and others in a small group of like-minded people, that is the $64,000 question.
Okay, so you've thought about this.
As they used to say. What's the common denominator? What's the unifying feature? I don't really know. I think in there has been a great sorting. I think what happened in 2020, 2021, the choices that we were invited to make, pick a side. Are you going to be with us or not? And a large number of people decided to be with to remain part of the main.
The liars.
And other people pulled back from it. This was the great sorting of our generation.
Yes.
The first big sorting like that there has been for decades. And I think some of it, was simply down to people's natural, amygdala fight or flight response to threat. I think some people, you don't know until whatever the gunfire starts.
That's exactly right.
Whether you can't predict it until
you think you're brave. Yeah.
And people like Jordan Peterson, have articulated it very well, that the culture of movies that we were all invited to watch growing up, you're invited to think in World War II, you'd have been with the French resistance.
Of course.
You would have hidden your neighbours because the black van was outside going to take them away. That's how people are invited to think that they would be the maverick. You would be the one that stands in the face of the tide. And then it happened. Before people realised what had happened, they had been sorted in that way. And I think the really part of what's really difficult now is that there's no going back, and yet we're all still living together. We're all all the people are broadly still there. Those that jumped one way and those that jumped the other, and we have to find this way to go on, because we were invited to see what a lot of people were prepared to do. One of the most difficult parts of it sounds silly now because it's really a detail, but quite early on, when the mask mandate was still very much, everyone had to wear a face mask, and I was having to go up and down to London for work. I was flying home every Sunday morning, and it would be, I don't know, British Airways flight or whoever, and I wasn't wearing a face mask, and under any circumstances, and I would go through the airport, which was difficult enough.
Wait, if I can just ask you to pause, why weren't you wearing a face mask? Wouldn't it just be easier to do what everyone else does and be obedient?
Yeah.
Why are you so disobedient?
I was always a rule keeper, a law abider. I always have. I've never been a protester. I've never been an activist. Anything. I'm very much I just was always. I wasn't really paying attention. Is the truth of it. I just wasn't really watching what was going on.
You were making archaeology documentaries.
Yeah, well, exactly. I had my own things going on. But to get back to the plane, so it'd be awkward enough, people watching you in the airport, but then I would go up the steps of the plane, the crew, the cabin crew would be masked, and they would say, "You're not wearing a face mask." And I would say, "No, I'm not wearing a face mask." Are you exempt? Some of them would say, and I would just say, yeah, I'm exempt, because in my head I was, because I thought I'm definitely, as a human being, I am definitely exempt from this nonsense. So I wasn't even lying in my own head. I thought, no, I am exempt, because there's no point in this.
I'm not a slave.
But
I'm exempt.
You turn right down into the body of the plane and be 299 people with face masks on, glaring at me, and I would think, it's this close. If someone gave the signal to, let's pin this guy down in the aisle.
Let's eat him.
You could see suddenly you could see I am actually at risk here, not from the establishment necessarily, not from the government in this moment. I'm just because I have made myself conspicuous.
Yes.
I have stood out from the norm, and anything could happen in the next 5 minutes. And I'd have to do the long walk down to my seat. It'd be 27E or something, some middle seat. And I'd have to get into it. And sometimes people either side of me would ring the service bell, put the light on, ask to be moved, to get away from me. And of course they couldn't because it was a full flight. And then I would have to sit for the hour and 15 minutes or whatever of the flight back up to Edinburgh as pariah, and then get off the plane. And then rinse and repeat. Do it next week, do it next week, do it next week.
Didn't it just...
And it's just that, like I say, that's a silly anecdote.
It's
really,
not silly at all. It's totally real. And
but suddenly I saw people you think, gosh, you could suddenly see how things happen. Questions you had thought, I wonder how they got that to happen in Germany in the 30s. I wonder how they got that to happen in the terror in France in the, at the,
of course,
at the back
1709,
end at the 18th century. I wonder how they got that to happen in Russia. Well, I don't ask myself that anymore. Because you think, oh...
You may have come to the obvious conclusion that the real debate is not between Republican and Democrat or socialist and capitalist, right and left. The real battle is between people who are lying on purpose and people who are trying to tell you the truth. It's between good and evil. It's between honesty and falsehood. And we hope we are on the former side. That's why we created this network, the Tucker Carlson Network. And we invite you to subscribe to it. Go to tuckercarlson.com/podcast. Our entire archive is there. A lot of behind-the-scenes footage of what actually happens in this barn when only an iPhone is running. tuckercarlson.com/podcast. You will not regret it. So you said that in public. You said famously something close to what you just said, which is, now I understand how totalitarian movements, sort of move downward into the population, and the population, by and large, supports some genocidal agenda that normal people wouldn't support, but they do support it. And you said that, and you were attacked as a bigot for saying that.
Oh yeah, but you must have been on the same. Surely you were getting the. What was your experience?
I don't pay any attention at all. So I'm sure I've been called every name. I don't care, at all. But I had checked out mentally, for sure. But
and what is it about? Why you've clearly been more sort of, I suppose, bullheaded, stubborn about things, and being prepared to stand in the face of things for longer than me. So what's in when you were asking me what did I think was the common, what was the common denominator? What was uniting all of the people that were refusing to go along with it? What's it in? What do you think?
Well, I just grew up in a different way, so I just knew that the majority opinion was not always right. I always felt that, and I knew that I didn't care what people thought of me except the people I love, just because of the way I grew up. And so it was not hard for me at all to take a position that is different from everyone else's. I only care about, the people directly around me. So that's just my temperament.
What about then the plight of, a concept like, democracy? We talk a lot, we're brought up in the West to talk about democracy and liberty and freedom and rights. What's your take on the reality of what democracy even means now? Because for me, I have been forced through a process of thinking about what democracy even is, and wondering what it is that we had that we called democracy, and certainly wondering what it is that we have now, if anything, of that which we used to call
democracy, at least in my view, it's been redefined to mean democracy is a system of government in which the people in charge, whether the elected officials, the agency heads, the people who run well-funded NGOs, when their views are represented, even though they may constitute 2% of the population's views, when those views are represented, when they're fully in charge and can do whatever they want, that's democracy. That's not my view of democracy. My view of democracy is much more primitive, kind of the peasant view of democracy, which is it's a species of private property. It's ownership. I am a citizen of this country. I was born here. So are my parents, and I therefore have a share in this. I'm a shareholder in the country. Like, I own part of this. Mine, actually. Now I own 1/350 millionth of it, but it's still ownership. It's still a share, and you can't treat me like a slave or even your servant, because this is my place, and That's what I think democracy is. It's almost like a temperamental. It's a description of the certain worldview that you have about your government and your relationship to that government. So that's how I feel about it. It doesn't mean that if 51% of the population wants something, it gets it every time. We have a representative democracy, a constitutional republic, as I'm often reminded. But basically, if you have a system where the people in charge don't care at all about what the population thinks, we know for sure that's not democracy. I mean, what did you think it was?
Well, as you just said, I in a state of semi-slumber, just imagined that I was represented in the places of power by the fact that I was able to vote, and I now realise that voting once every 4 or 5 years is nothing at all. That's a completely meaningless transaction to me now. It always was. I mean, I see now why I was, oh God, it's a general election, I better vote for somebody. I was always very disconnected from it.
Right.
But now I partly think that may have been some kind of semi-instinctive realization that it was meaningless anyway. But I worry now about quite a lot of people, around me talk about direct democracy as a solution to our problems. And it's always the Swiss model that's quoted, referenda about this, that, and everything. You sort out everything by having a referendum about it. And that, having gone through the last 4 years, that worries me, because if there had been a referendum about face masks or lockdown or God forbid, mandatory jabs, we'd have got all of them. The majority vote would have enacted all of those things, mandated jabs, longer, tighter lockdowns, face masks, and all of the rest of it would have been enacted by direct democracy. So now I think the problem you've got there is the majority. You better hope they come to your conclusion.
Well,
because otherwise you've just, if we take the step of thinking that direct democracy is the way to get us out of these problems, well, in short, I live in fear of direct democracy.
Well, so why do you think they're saying that? I mean, what people leave out, I'm very familiar with Switzerland. I have ancestors from Switzerland, went to school in Switzerland. Was there twice this year. I'm not an expert on Switzerland, but I know it well enough to say conclusively their political system works because they have a Swiss population with certain attitudes that have evolved over 1,000 years, and it works for them. And they vote, twice a year and all this stuff. And the cantons have a lot of independent power, very weak central government, et cetera, et cetera. But that works with Swiss people. They're changing the population of the West, and particularly of Europe, so fast that you sort of wonder, what is that? I mean, the idea that, there is a thing called a Briton or a Spaniard or a Frenchman or Portuguese people or Belgians or people from Liechtenstein or whatever, that there are sort of populations, indigenous populations in these countries that have a certain national character and language and shared history. All of that is being obliterated by mass immigration. It's on purpose. It's against the will of the existing populations of those countries. And it's clearly tied to political power. I mean, am I missing something? I mean, look, this is my view from 3,000 miles away.
No, without a shadow of a doubt, I think the same thing is, it's happening right here.
It's obliterating the United States, but it's harder for Americans to fight back against it because there's our indigenous population, or the American Indians, who aren't even really the indigenous population, but whatever, they were here before the Europeans arrived. They replaced another population who was here before them, but whatever. The point is, we don't have we don't feel we have the moral standing that, say, the Scots would have. Scotland was never, or has not been in a very long time, a colonial power. Why are they doing this to Scotland?
Identity is a sense of identity, personal identity, the sovereign individual, and then that coming together to be, maybe a sense of community in your town, then and it broadens out to national identity, is problematic I'm utterly convinced that there's just a huge centralization of power going on.
Right.
That there's an anonymous, faceless cabal of people whose names we don't know, whose faces we wouldn't recognize, who are centralizing power. And for the first time, the technology is enabling that to be global. People have tried it in the past, whatever. People have tried to have been totalitarian in the past, but it's the technology and the reach has never enabled a tyrant to control the whole world. But that is there now, and I think that's what we are hurtling towards. And people like Eric Hoffer and The True Believer and so on, he wrote so effectively about how every mass movement has sought to take away people's national identity and their personal identity. So they want each individual to turn their back on their parents and on their family as being, you can do better than these people. Their ideas are outmoded. They've messed you up, and you'd be better off without that influence. And likewise, they want to cut people away from their national roots, their sense of belonging in a place, and their sense that they are British or that they are French. Because once you get people deracinated in that way, cut away from their roots, and the process is also about making people ashamed of their history, be it their own family history or their national history.
I've noticed. So
that there's nothing in the past but things to be ashamed of. So you get people to disavow the past, to disavow their parents, to disavow the family, to disavow the nation as it's been understood, and then those people are just dots on a spreadsheet. They're just flickering dots on a screen that can be put anywhere. And now you have a global population that don't belong or feel connected to anywhere, and so you can put them anywhere, because they have no roots. And that's been tried over and over again. All the great faiths have attempted something similar. All the great ideologies, all the isms, fascism, communism, whatever, they all seek to do to, as Hoffer explains it in True Believer, they all apply the same tools to get people disconnected until you're just a lone individual that's ready to don a uniform and do something new in the face of utopia, the nowhere place that is the ideal future that's easy to sell people because it doesn't actually exist.
But what it means is total destruction. I mean, I see mass immigration in Europe as a form of warfare against the indigenous population. They're being destroyed and degraded. Very obvious to me as a serial visitor to that continent over 50 years. And it gets worse every time I go there.
Yeah.
But I noticed that the people who are from there, whose parents were born there, whose ancestors were there 1,000 years ago, in your case, wearing like face paint and skirts with spears or whatever, scary Highland tribes. Like, none of those people feel free to stand up and say, "What are you doing?" Like, no, you can't flood my country with people from another place because they're not Scottish and I am, and you're wrecking my country. Like, why can't? That's not racist. That's just obvious.
Yeah, and it's also important to remember all the time that these people are being uprooted and moved in their turn as well.
Oh, I agree.
Everyone, and so so what happens is, yes, indigenous populations are being flooded by people from elsewhere, but those people have been uprooted.
Yeah.
By this, by the same forces of chaos and disruption. The West has done god awful things to one country of the Middle East and elsewhere, one after another, African countries, and those people have been cut away from their roots, and they're on the move as well. So everyone's victim in this. Everyone, and where people turn up in large numbers, where they, from an ethnic and cultural and heritage point of view, don't belong. But that's also not their fault. They're pawns on the board as well. And of course, what happens is that the people, the incumbent population, feel threatened by the arrival of the new, and they get angry with the incomers. When really, we should all everyone should link arms and say, who did this? Let's calm down, everyone. Let's sort out exactly how this has happened to all.
How are we being manipulated?
Why are you? Who's moved you here? So it's important because that you fall so readily into the.
I agree, but do you have that conversation in Scotland specifically?
It's very difficult because, of course, everything, any kind of dissent, any kind of raising a voice in that way, brings out the same predictable tools from the toolbox. So you just get called. I've long ago, I've been described as anti-Semitic for one reason and another. I've been described as a white supremacist for one reason and another. I've had all the labels, and you said right at the beginning, you're now known as a conspiracy theorist. They're almost badges of honor. If you're not being tarred with those brushes, then you're not doing your bit. Because if you can immediately, that old line about that you're over the target when you're taking flack. If they've got nothing better than to call you anti-Semitic, white supremacist, whatever, then you think, oh, I must be doing something right, because that's just the same old box of clumsy, blunt tools that get brought out to shout down anyone who's actually asking important, pertinent questions. But we're not going to answer them, because we're not going to give them the answer, because the answer will expose us, the baddies, even further. So let's just dismiss them as
does it
racists
still
or
work
whatever.
In Scotland, in the UK?
Well, I think, as I say, because many people are now finding that it's a badge of honour to be, I've been a Putin apologist. I've had that one flung at me. I've been all sorts of things, just because I've said, we're jumping into all of these stories at the moment. In the third act was actually the expression that Jimmy Dore used to me when I had him on my show the other week, and he said, everyone was invited to join the Ukraine story in the third act. But there's pages and pages of this play before you get to the Russian tanks trundling across the Ukrainian border. You're coming in late. You've joined the cinema in the last. Well,
there had been a war in progress for 8 years,
and now it's Israel Gaza. And everyone's invited to that all started on October the 7th. And you go,
didn't?
No. So it's all obvious. It's all obvious stuff. And because those turn spotlights onto places and stories and backstories that the troublemakers, the original troublemakers, do not want to be confronted with, then hence shutting everything down, censorship, labeling, dismissing people as whatever bad name they can think of.
How
Because
long did it
forces
take
people
you
be
to
quiet.
get to decide you didn't care what they called you?
Again, it's that thing about the first time you get punched, it hurts, but worse than the pain, it's the shock. But then the next time you get punched, you think, oh yeah, that's that again. And I suppose around the time, because I came into all of this, I suppose, or I was seen to come into all of this around COVID and lockdowns and vaccines for children and all of the rest of it. But then, as I say, once I picked that thread, and then everything started to, then the big tapestry all started to fray and unfurl. The next thing that came up then was Ukraine. And suddenly people there was this loose coalition, I suppose, this fragile thing of people coming together around the COVID debacle and asking the right questions and being militant enough and saying no. There was a cohesion there. But it was as though the powers that be, right, we've been rumbled on COVID. Let's get a war going. Wars are great. And so Ukraine started, and a lot of the people that had it was like in Awakenings, the Oliver Sacks, Robert De Niro movie. It was like people that had briefly come awake. Just when the Ukraine war started, they all just went back to where they had been before, listening to the propaganda, just taking the official line, accepting the official narrative. And so I suppose it was when I started being accused of being an apologist for Putin, I thought, I've already been an aluminium tinfoil hat wearing conspiracy theorist, anti-vaxxer, granny killer. Now I'm a Putin apologist. Well, fair enough. I've seen the way this works, and now that I've collected that badge like a scout, I can put that one on my sleeve as well. Now I'm a Putin apologist, and I really don't care now, because if you're not being accused of being a whatever label, then you're not in the debate.
I just reject the whole premise, which is that some group of people who really kind of hate you or have contempt for you at the very least can decide who your enemies are and then require you to agree with them. I've never had really strong feelings about Russia. I certainly wasn't mad at Russia. Why would I be? They never did anything to me. But like Toria Newland in our State Department decides, well, they're our main enemy for whatever weird reason she has for deciding that. And now I have to sign on to that. Like I'm an adult man. I can decide who I like and who I don't like. The whole idea of it. Well, get on board. Well, I don't know. Maybe I don't want to. Like what? Who would go along with that? How could any adult allow some faraway office holder, agency head, or NGO director to decide what their opinions should be? Well, your opinions as a father of 3, a married man with a job, like what you have to believe. Does that seem weird to you?
It does seem, well, it does seem weird to me. I think people are frightened.
Of what?
Well, I've, as was talking about that experience on the plane with my barefaced, literally, defiance of that diktat. It's extremely uncomfortable to stick out, to put your head up, to be noticed.
Yeah.
I suppose, in answer to your earlier question about what would be a unifying characteristic of people that said no, I suppose I had already had a long time of being recognisable to some people because of the kind of low-level familiarity, celebrity, whatever. Some people would recognise me from television documentaries that I had made. And so I had grown a kind of a harder shell about being looked at and, whispered about, noticed. So that sticking out in that way, I was already slightly familiar with. Whereas I think for people who had enjoyed complete anonymity, and then it came to, say, the COVID thing and not wearing a face mask or asking questions about what their children should or shouldn't put in their bodies, it's very uncomfortable to stand up and be noticed, to be visible. And so because I had a little bit of I'd grown a little bit of a callous, a little bit of hard skin about being noticed because I was a face from television, I suppose made it that little bit less uncomfortable for me to then be spotlit about, for the first time in my life, controversial issues. I'd never been controversial in my life, but at least I was slightly familiar with being noticed.
When you started to get attacked as a bigot, a crazy person, white supremacist, whatever that is, how did the people you love how did your wife react?
Well, Trudy's here, and Trudy,
right there.
Trudy's in this room, and we've been 100% together on all of it. She's never blinked, from it all began, and so I've always had that absolute. For so many people, where a split happened between partners over some of this, I can't imagine how awful that must be. Because it's hard enough.
I can't imagine
it. But we've always been 100% together on it. And even where in our wider families, where people, took the jabs and whatever, there's never been any trouble. Differences of opinion and people thinking what was the right thing to do, what was the wrong thing to do. But no rancor, no shouting, nothing like that. And so I've mercifully, thankfully, I've never been more grateful in my life for Trudy because of the way that she responded.
But it's a
in
big
the face
change.
Of all of
I mean, if you're married to someone who's on television and who's famous for, his views on the Vikings, and everyone kind of likes you for that, and all of a sudden he's being called, a white supremacist. That's a big change.
Yeah, yes, it is. But she, as I say, she just never blinked. She didn't blink.
Well, you are blessed.
In the game of chicken, she just didn't blink. She knows me. She's known me since I was 19, and when it comes to being called things like anti-Semitic or racist or misogynist or whatever, Putin apologist, she knows me. So she doesn't have to wonder, is he? Because she she's knows.
Smiling.
Was,
so no, you're just really fortunate to have that.
Well, yes, fortunate, but we also, I suppose, you have to kind of think, well, we probably, chose one another and stayed for reasons, and then you think, well, this, as it turns out, this being a testing situation, this would be part of why I chose this person, because
yes,
one way or another, I think I probably knew that she'd be like this in a situation like this, and me for her, we would just back each other up, which does make you very invulnerable, because this whole process has absolutely, in a way that's cliched, you do get confronted with what matters, and we've we've been thrust into this from really a very recognizable and ordinary lifestyle. We've got a mortgage, and we've got, and we depend on a regular income to keep the wheels on the wagon, like everybody else.
That's right.
The vast majority of people, and so we identify and have that commonality with. That's why I think a lot of people, write letters to me from all over the world, and they stop me in the street to talk to me, because. I think they instinctively realise that I'm not a credentialed academic, and I'm not an expert on this, that, or the other. I'm very much just a regular person with all of the same concerns that they've got. Kids at school, all of it that people were able to identify with. But when I say that I've been confronted with what really matters, you think all that stuff about whether you could afford a second home or luxury cars, or all of that, all that cliched stuff that people are encouraged to think about. And you think, God, no, what really matters is spending 24 hours a day with somebody that backs you up.
Amen.
And my kids are the same. The kids they came through they were under pressure at the time to take jabs. You won't be able to go to the gym, or you won't be able to go to, you won't be able to have your social lives, you won't be able to travel. And they were rattled by that. They were, younger then. They were teenagers when all of that happened. Very, impressionable and vulnerable. But we got them through that. But they didn't. They didn't. They ended up choosing not to take the jabs either. And I cannot put into words how much that means to me, that they didn't get polluted with that product. That's it. That's everything to me. Never mind the fact that Trudy and I didn't. The fact that it didn't go into them. That there's no salary you could give me. There's no bonus you could bung me that would make any difference. So it's all of that, and so it's hard to talk about it in many ways without sounding almost like you're patronising people. But the extent to which I've been reminded about what's important in life is worth all of it. You call me any name you want, because I know who I am, and my family know who I am, and I can look at my kids and my wife in the eye, and she in mine, and think, no matter what happens, we made the right calls.
It does seem like, obviously, you're from a slightly different culture than we're from here in the United States. It's a much smaller country. It's an island in the middle of a freezing sea, and there does seem to be a greater level of conformity in the UK than there is in the United States. And
do you think so? Is that how it strikes you?
It does. I mean, it's a more obedient culture. You never had a Wild West. You didn't have gunfights, or you haven't, since Christianity showed up. Etc. But it does seem like, and I'm judging this from your media landscape, it seems like you and Russell Brand, maybe there's somebody else, George Galloway, there don't seem to be many dissenters. Describe the media in the UK right now.
Oh my goodness. I have to be careful with my flowery language.
Go crazy.
Well, I'm appalled. I'm just simply appalled that we don't have anything that passes for, in the same way that we don't have any representation in Parliament.
Yeah.
We don't have any representation in the mainstream media. That was
at all, right?
That was another aspect of what was so unbelievable and so discombobulating and stressful about all of this, because in the early weeks and months of what was going on from 2019, 2020 onwards, there was that period of waiting for the people, the silverbacks of the media world, to stand up and do what was required to be done, which was ask some questions. Don't propagandize. Don't just give us the government line and the pharmaceutical line on all of this.
Yeah, stop lying.
Challenge it. So that incredible period of wait, and every single one of them failed the test. all the mainstream channels, all the big titles, the Telegraph, the Times, the Daily Mail, the works, they all swallowed it and pumped it back out again. So the media we don't have a media worth its name. And journalism, Scotland, for example, had a proud history of journalism. Dundee were truly studied to be a journalist. D.C. Thompson, an iconic publishing name in Scottish journalism. Jute jam and journalism was the cry from Dundee. And a proud history of being ready to hold to the fire the feet of those in authority. And overnight, either it had slipped away and we hadn't noticed,
yes.
It was only exposed by COVID, or it slipped away as soon as the COVID debacle started, and then realizing you're part of that process of casting around, looking for God. We can't be the only people that think this is bonkers and bollocks. There must be other people like this. And then that process of going online, and as you say, Russell Brand, God bless him, he was an established podcaster. He was already there doing other things. And when all this started, he was suddenly to the fore. Asking
other
those
things is an understatement. I mean, he was from a completely different world.
Yeah.
He had no incentive to get involved.
But when it was required, he was there, and we were consuming Russell Brand as much of it as we could get, and we were watching you, and we were watching George Galloway on the Mother of All talk shows, and these funny things, these constellations. All the other stars went out in the night sky, and suddenly all these new constellations appeared, and you're looking at. Thank God, right? We can listen. Who can we listen to today? Who may have many points of view that in other subjects and other concerns I might not agree with, but they're certainly asking some of the right questions about this. And so the new media stepped into the fray, and if anyone, and they are, people were surprised to see me, a guy that used to make documentaries about Stonehenge and the White Cliffs of Dover, and and waterfalls and Purple Mountain Majesty and all of that. If they were surprised to see me suddenly, spotlit on live television, asking questions about and refusing to comply with this, that, and the next thing, if people were surprised to see me cast in that role, well, not half as surprised as I was. Or Trudy was, looking at me going, how did this happen to you? How have you ended up doing this? I said, well, that's a very good question. I really don't know. But it's like the bit in Airplane, where the pilot's dead with food poisoning and the co-pilot's dead and all the aircraft, and some schmuck has to come from the back of the plane and sit, but because nobody else is going to do it. So a lot of people were suddenly cast into that unlikely role, and have taken the dog's abuse for having done so. And their only crime has been to say, hang on, I've got a question before we all leap into the abyss of all of this totalitarian regime. I'd quite like to ask a couple of questions just before we all go. And and some of the hardest criticism has come from people that you would have thought ostensibly would have been on your side.
I mean, you live in a place where there are, I really don't think the American mind, we often complain about our media, which is Stalinist, completely Stalinist. They serve the people in power. They'll tell any lie. It doesn't matter to them at all. But I think it's much worse in the UK. That's just my observation.
Well, I mean, I did watch some of your guys, eating hamburgers and saying you get a free one of these if you get your jab. And
it was totalitarian.
And dancing alongside, people dressed up as hypodermic needles, and I mean, I remember all of that. But so yes, it's
But it doesn't seem like any dissent is allowed in your country. For example, tell us about the Scottish hate speech law.
Oh well, that I would say that's part and parcel of something that seems to be happening around the world in a certain kind of Western country, which is to say either small countries with small populations or quite large land masses but small populations, so Canada, Australia, but places like New Zealand,
the Anglosphere, the English-speaking world.
But then something equally sinister also happened in Israel, where Netanyahu said, make my people the petri dish of the world. Experiment on these here lab rats.
Yes.
So again, a small population with an authoritarian leader that just offhand just decided to do what he wanted. But that was true of all of them. So, and yes, but Britain, but then Scotland obviously has a devolved administration based in Edinburgh, empowered to take a certain amount of decisions separate from Westminster in London, and we've been under the thrall of an administration in Edinburgh led by the Scottish National Party for what seems like 1,000 years. It's been like an SNP Reich.
It doesn't seem very Scottish to me at all.
Well, I first put my head above the parapet and got into trouble as a contrarian all the way back in 2014, actually, because that was the time of the referendum on whether or not Scotland would remain part of the United Kingdom or would strike out as a separate entity. And God forgive me, I had kind of been keeping out of it. I had my opinions, but I was keeping out of it. Relatively late in the day, coming up to the vote, I think it was the Telegraph, but one of the big broadsheet newspapers asked me for, what do you think? Would you write us, 1,000 words about what you think? And I wrote that, well, to cut a long story short, that I preferred to stay part of the United Kingdom. Cue the opprobrium from the nationalists, those who, and because of it, I had made television like The History of Scotland, and I had been seen as a certain kind of Scottish TV presenter. I think a lot of people made the broad assumption that I was probably nationalist in my politics, which I never have been, and never will be. But nonetheless, so I got into trouble then, and so I've been under attack from the SNP and its little wizards ever since then. So I have it's important, probably in the context of this conversation, to make plain that it actually wasn't COVID that I first got into trouble. It was the independence referendum, and so Scotland is run by low caliber people, low caliber cacistocracy. Government by the worst of people.
Yes,
and the SNP started out famously. Well, it didn't start out, but at the time of the referendum, it was led by Alex Salmond, who at least was he was an able, sure-footed politician and a good orator. So he had some game, but subsequently it's been Nicola Sturgeon, and it was and then more recently Hamza Yousaf, and now he's fallen over his own feet, and he's been replaced by another non-entity. But it was Nicola Sturgeon through the COVID debacle, and they just seemed to she reveled in the power, and she reveled in appearing every day to count death tolls and insist on the continuation of lockdown and cutting the 6 inches off the bottoms of doors in school classrooms to let air circulate, and insane.
Is she a pretty smart, happy, well-balanced person?
I would say no, and no. No tolerance. But anyway, she's gone. But so you have in the SNP in Scotland people who are drunk with the idea of power. They really. I mean, the very idea that a majority would have put that bunch actually in control of an independent country makes my blood run cold, because it was a close run thing for a while, but it's gone now. The threat's gone for a generation, if not forever. But so they're inept, they're cacistocratic, and when it came to the hate crime legislation, they just seemed to go for one offensive, irritating policy after another. They attempted a named persons bill in recent history, where they were trying to insinuate between every child and their parents a named person. Now, that could be a teacher, it could be any figure. That person would have been encouraged, and the child would have been encouraged to establish a relationship with that named person. If there are things you don't want to talk to mum and dad about, you could talk to this named person, and your parents would never need to know that those conversations had taken place. This was the named persons bill. It was eventually knocked back at the Supreme.
But this is an attempt to destroy the family.
Yeah, well, that was my interpretation of it. And
what's the other interpretation?
Well, it was supposed to be
the government has more authority in your home than you do.
It's the same reason for clamping down on the internet. it's for the safety of children. That's what they always say. This it's about protecting children from this, that, and the other. When of course we know it's got nothing to do with that. It's just about taking control of the internet. So the Named Persons Act was yes, but in line with that idea of if you want to lead a popular movement, you have to separate the children from their parents. You've got to put pressure on the family until the family fractures. It took the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, to finally turn back and stop the Named Persons Bill, but it'll be in someone's drawer somewhere, still under consideration. The hate crime legislation was just so it's important, not to come in on the SNP in the third act, so to speak. They've got a long history of this kind of behaviour, and when it came to the hate crime legislation, that was a pet project of Humza Yousaf, who was the sometime Justice Minister. He always failed in every post, but fell upwards. So he was justice and failed and got promoted up to health and failed and was promoted up to whatever, one inappropriate appointment after another. And the hate crime legislation was very much something that he championed.
And what was it?
It was well, you see this a manifestation of it in Canada. Trudeau has brought in similar legislation. I don't know if it's called the hate crime. It's almost the same name. But you see it all over. The same thing is happening in Australia. The attempt by these tin pot dictatorial politicians to have control of what people say and what people think. Humza Yousaf wanted to criminalise what people were saying in the privacy of their own homes. So the idea was that if mum and dad were having a conversation in front of the television one evening and dad said something, if the child inadvertently repeated it in school the next day, let's say, my dad said so-and-so, the police could come to the house, hypothetically, and say to the father, what was that you were saying in this house last night? We've got, your child, that was the level of it.
So is Hamza, that's totally North Korean. I don't even think that happens in North Korea, actually.
He's gone now.
But is he considered, he should be expelled from your country for doing that, in my opinion. But is he considered a villain? How could he that's so evil.
Yes, you would think that any rational person would respond to that kind of notion in the same way. But look at the way it's happening all over. It's not just happening in Scotland, it's happening all over. It's part of a pattern of behaviour of a certain kind of controlled leader in one Western country after another, who are demonstrably working from the same script. It's no coincidence that all of these Western regimes in these countries are taking similar steps at the same time. They're not acting independently of one another. They're not all having these dreadful ideas independently at the same time. No. This stuff is it's part of the same pattern that we saw during lockdown, where suddenly everyone was saying build back better, everyone was saying narrow window of opportunity, everyone was saying safe and effective. They were clearly centralised scripts.
It was a pandemic of the unvaccinated. I think we can agree on that.
Yes, absolutely. That was a favourite.
So, but what is that? What are we looking at? Who's coming up with these ideas, these talking points? What's the point of it all? I don't want to be a conspiracy nut, but the level of coordination suggests that there is, some sort of body atop all of this controlling everything. What else does it suggest?
It feels as though, I think it's getting harder and harder to overlook what seems like the certainty that we're on the cusp of change.
Yeah.
A paradigm change. I would say that we're being herded towards feudalism. Most people, for most of 5,000 years of human history, most people pretty much lived in serfdom.
Yeah.
In a feudal state, you can describe it any way you like, but it's a narrow, very, very small group at the top with everything, with all the castles, ownership of everything, and everyone else is so far beneath them as to be at insect level, and treated accordingly. That is what we're going back to.
Really, up until the 19th century,
it was the way of it for everyone everywhere. The kind of way of life that has been possible for some of us, a relative handful in the scheme of things, a blinking of an eye in the great story of human civilization, a tiny, tiny lucky group for a couple of hundred years in the West were able to live lives of unbelievable liberty and opportunity and equality and aspiration, and if you wanted to, you could get whatever you were capable of achieving for yourself.
Yes.
And enough generations have taken that for granted that now it has fallen, and people think that food in the supermarkets, lights on in the dark, police on the street that actually care about the people rather than being enforcers for the establishment. They think that there's been a misconception that somehow is just in the natural order of things, that society works like that. And just the merest glance at the rest of the world at the moment, never mind 5,000 years of history, will show that the possibility of living the kind of lives that some of us have been able to live for a very brief period of time is vanishingly, it's impossibly unlikely what we've had. But too many people have been taking it for granted one after another. That now those who would return us to feudalism saw the opportunity and have been working towards it, and populations all over the West taking it for granted, being tolerant, being nice, keeping their heads down in return for safety and convenience, have laid themselves open. They're not in a fit state to defend themselves against a well-organised, well-motivated small group that wants to return the whole thing to some sort of neo-feudalism. But I mean, that's not to say it's too late. I don't want to be completely negative here. That I do think it's still possible. I think enough people are realising all the time. And I would say, I think...
Wait, may I just ask one thing? So are you suggesting, it sounds like you are, and you probably are right, but that some kind of feudalism is the natural state of man? Radically hierarchical societies are just natural.
Yes, absolutely. People enslaved. Slavery is a natural state.
Of course.
It just is. It's been a reality for such a large part of everyone who's ever lived or died.
Well, of course.
Through history. But I think, when in 2016, when we had Trump elected here and Britain voted Brexit, subsequent to that, we got COVID and goodness knows what all. Trudy said, perhaps she wasn't alone, but she was the person that I heard say it. She said, those two things were not supposed to happen. They were not in the script. Somebody took their eye off the ball and allowed a figure like Donald Trump to be elected in America.
That's right.
And for the population of Britain, by a narrow margin, but nonetheless by a majority, to leave the European Union. And Trudy said, everything we've had since has been a sustained punishment beating to put those populations back in their box. So everything that's happened, including the evaporation of your southern border, all of that that's happened, has been a panicky response by a narrow group that saw two things happening off script that were of great significance because it was democratic. Those were popular votes, and now populism is being stamped on all over the world. The truckers' revolt, farmers' protests all across Europe. All of these things are being mischaracterized by the authorities as far right, as extremist, as all of the same labels, because
in both cases,
they've
the
got to
people
nip that.
Didn't get what they voted for. I mean, Trump was not able to govern very effectively. He couldn't build the wall that he promised, was investigated and spied on from the very first day. And I don't think you guys got Brexit. You voted for Brexit, right?
No, absolutely. 52%, I think it was, 52 to 48% in favour of leaving the European Union. And from the moment the ink dried on that decision, all of the powers that be in the establishment, in the civil service, across the political parties, moved heaven and earth to thwart that decision. And so it's been Brexit in name only, Brino, they've called it, because it's now worse. I would say that the situation for those people that aspired to Brexit, they've got less now than they had before the vote happened, because they've been so comprehensively punished and Brexit has been so eviscerated, the very concept of it has been so hollowed out, that the people that wanted it have got less than nothing from it, because it was populist. And notice also that in the last 4 or 5 years, populist has become a pejorative.
How can people use the word democracy to describe your country?
Well, we don't. That's why I have these fundamental problems about. We certainly don't have democracy. I wonder when democracy went away. I wonder for how long it's been standing.
What's
there.
your guess?
I really, oh gosh, I mean, in my most conspiratorial moments, I think something began to happen all across the West after the Second World War.
Clearly.
Really, during the war and after the war, I think the moves I don't know if it started then, but I think there was a gear shift.
Have you been to Tokyo? Have you been to Japan?
I have filmed in Tokyo.
So then you sort of wonder when you go to Japan, if you go from London to Tokyo, there's no evidence that the side that won actually won and the side that lost actually lost. Like if you didn't know the history, you would think, well, obviously Japan won the war. Look at it. Obviously England lost it. Look at England.
Yes.
What is that?
Oh, yes. I mean, there are all sorts of things that are confusing. I'm not a historian. I love history. I'm fascinated by history. My shelves are full of history books. But
how many books have you written?
Written. 12 or 13.
I think it's fair to call you a historian.
But I'm not an academic. I don't have
Right.
any, and nor do I want to be. I never really have had that. It's not in my nature. I'm not really. Anyway, so it means that I'm prepared. I'm perfectly happy to be at home to unorthodox ideas about history, because I don't have any academic position. I don't have a professorship to defend.
Maybe that's why you can see the world clearly.
And I sometimes wonder if I have a USP, a unique selling point. I think it may be that the things that I have said over the last few years, everyone knows they're true.
Yeah.
It's just that for whatever reason I've said them, and I've had the opportunity and the platform from which to say them, and because I am just a regular person saying what every other regular person knows is true. That's my. But we've wandered off.
I think that's you're qualified enough. You're not an Oxford Don, but you've been right about a lot of things.
So I've got basic questions about the Second World War.
Okay, what are they? Like clearly something important changed in the West in 1945. What was that?
What's very interesting to me is that Hitler and Stalin were together at the beginning.
Yeah, of course.
Of it, and when Poland was invaded, Britain said, we will do whatever it takes to restore freedom and democracy to the people from whom it's been denied, stolen.
And then what happened, Neil Oliver?
And then you've only got to read any coverage of the Second World War to know that at the end of the Second World War, Poland was left swallowed whole by.
Well, they handed it to Stalin.
So the stated objective.
What is that?
The stated objective of Britain declaring war at the time was, well, you didn't do it. You didn't do that.
Well, you didn't even try. And in our country, it's illegal to criticize Winston Churchill. He's the greatest hero in world history.
And when you look at the murkiness that happened at Yalta, between Roosevelt and Stalin and Churchill, and the fact that agreements were arrived at somehow where many people who wanted whatever you would call the West, they wanted to be the West, they were just allowed to be swallowed whole by the communist bloc.
Yeah, to the most violent totalitarian in history. And so they handed these countries, they went to war to protect the sovereignty of these countries that they then handed.
And people were being chased back across specified lines back into that.
So what is that? Clearly, there's lying here. So what's the truth?
So we started there because we were speculating about when it all started to go wrong. When the slide towards anything that ends in ism is the same. Whether it's fascism or communism or any of these things end up with piles of corpses. You can't get a cigarette paper between these between any of these ideologies. So it's important not to be distracted by whether or not it's National Socialism or communism or whatever. They're all the same. They're good for a handful of people and they're catastrophic for everybody else. And so clearly something shifted up a gear in the West, in the middle of during the Second World War and after, and has been moving faster and faster ever since. But I think there's been an extraordinary gamble taken now, because even people who are in a state of semi-slumber like myself were aware of notions like a social contract. That we as citizens would be no taxation without representation. We would have our views represented. We would have our liberty defended. We would be safe in peaceful countries, and in return for that, we would pay tax and we would submit to certain otherwise onerous restrictions on you can't do anything. You've got to agree to be policed by consent and so on and so on. And that's okay. So there's now a social contract. There's a quid pro quo there for people. There's a reason for people to comply because there's something in it for them. Liberty, aspiration, hope, all of that being protected by legislation and a constitution and all of that. The gamble that's been taken now is that all of that is being taken away. Everything that the people, all of the inducements to be law-abiding, peaceful citizens is being taken away. And what do I get in return? Nothing. You're going to get a digital ID. You're going to get central bank digital currencies. You're going to live in 15-minute cities. You're going to have we'll tell you what to eat. Your currency will be programmable, so we'll have complete moment-to-moment in real-time control of everything you do, everything you want to do. Now, that's a heck of a gamble for a very narrow group of people to take with billions of people, because there's nothing in it for the people. There's nothing in it for them. And I think they have fumbled the ball. I think that's where there's hope, because not 50%, not 51% of the people have realised that and would do anything about it, but history shows that it never requires. It only takes 5% or 10% of people to cotton on and do something about it and make the difference. And I think that in the final moves towards this kind of neo-feudalism, they have exposed themselves. They've gone galloping towards the finishing line too early, in the wrong way, and too many people have seen it. And I think in there somewhere is hope, and it's probably enough hope.
I wonder, though, it does seem two things. It seems like they're pushing the population, not just of your country or mine, but really of most Western countries, right to the point of revolution. Oh. Like, how about we give you nothing and you shut up and take it?
Yeah.
And erase all hope for a future for your children or grandchildren, or even having children or grandchildren. Okay.
It's quite a gamble to take.
But the gamble is that the technology is evolving so quickly that it'll allow them to harness, the surveillance state and various tools of violence that are so overwhelming that there's nothing the population could do about it. Drones and AI are going to be enough to sort of force people to accept this. That's how I read it.
It's possible. Yes, of course it's possible. But I think it's incumbent upon us to be optimistic that that's not what happens. I think there's an absolute obligation. It's beyond a right. It's an absolute obligation to be positive. I struggle with it. I have to be yanked back onto the path of righteousness by Trudy all the time, because she is by inclination more positive than I am. But nonetheless, I lean to the dark side all the time.
Well, Scots have dark souls, don't they?
Yes, we are. It's never difficult to tell the difference between a Scotsman and a ray of sunshine, as the saying goes. But you have to. It's when we spoke earlier about being brought to terms with being made to confront what really matters. And it is difficult to talk about it in many ways. It almost makes a person blush because of the things that you find yourself having to say. But the Constitution of the United States, the First Amendment, it's at times like this that these things are suddenly, a light comes on inside them and suddenly everyone sees them as though for the first time. It's only because they're being threatened that people see them. The language, the inalienable right is so important. That this, you get this at school, but the inalienable is to say that your freedom is not, you're born with it. It's there. It's from God. It certainly isn't given to you by any person, and it can't be taken from you by any person. But the third and most important bit about inalienable, I only really began to contemplate in recent years, is that even if you want to surrender your freedom, you can't, because it's inalienable. You are lumbered with it. You're stuck with it. It's like your leg. You can't. It's part of you, your freedom, and it's when it's challenged in this way, and it's under freedom. And people talk about freedoms as though it's plural. There's only freedom. It's a single thing, and because it's inalienable, it's at the moment when it's being threatened that none of us we have an obligation to defend it. You don't get the choice. If someone offers you slavery, will you be my slave? You can't, because it's your inalienable right to be free. You can't surrender to slavery. It's not your thing to give away. And that's that's why some of this, I suppose, had to happen. People need to see the freedom of speech being taken away by hate crime legislation, hate speech legislation, or whatever. They need these things to happen before you look again at what freedom is, what democracy might be, what it is to have inalienable rights. And we don't have the option to give these things up, even if we're broken and we want to. And I think these are profound verities.
What's the tipping point? What's the point at which you won't have optimism? What's the point at which...
Never. You can't.
Good. Well, good.
Well, you can't, because that's what I mean. Because you're not allowed. You're not entitled to give up, because it's in the nature of inalienable rights that you, even if unto death, they can, you may take our lives, but you'll never take our freedom. The oft quoted line from Braveheart. I mean, that is just it. So there's nothing to be pessimistic about, essentially, because the option to give up is not there. You don't get to give it up.
Do you think the totalitarians will win, honestly?
No, they won't. Because I also think a lot nowadays about natural law. I read about common law, which has become an obsession. And I read about natural law. And whether you're religious or not, if you accept an intelligent universe, and then natural law says that the intelligent universe does want the best for you, unlike our regimes and our establishments and our powers that be, the universe is there for you to be the best expression of yourself and consciousness that there can be. And all of that can be subverted by evil. A bit like if you can hold a ball under the surface of water for as long as you've got the strength to do it, but the ball wants to be somewhere else, because that's in the natural order of things. And eventually the totalitarians will run out of the strength to subvert the way that things are supposed to be. And it's difficult to put a timeline on these things. I wouldn't say that we're going to see the end of it in our lifetimes, you and me. And it might be for our children to see the end of it. But it will end, because the natural law will reassert itself. I didn't. Another of the things I was sort of sleepy about, in a state of slumber about, I didn't really think about faith. I've always been a person of faith quietly. I don't go to church, but I believe in a a transcendent, intelligent entity. And I think that was brought home to me, and the light came on in it for me during this time as well, because so many people wrote to me. Thousands of people wrote to me from all over the world. This game started where people, one woman wrote a letter to me and addressed it to Neil Oliver, near Stirling Castle, Stirling, Scotland. And the letter came to me. And I thought, well, that's impressive. The postman managed to get that to me. And I put a picture of it on social media, and without thinking, and it opened floodgates. And now I've had thousands of letters like these. And so people were writing to me without knowing my address. And the vast majority of the letters were about, this is a fight between good and evil. This is a fight between right and wrong. This is about light and dark. It was as fundamental as that for most of those people that were writing to me. And perversely, in an upside down way, it was becoming aware of evil in the world around me that made me think, there will be, what's the opposite of evil? There must be good. There must be good, because I see the evil. And every force has its equal and opposite.
Yes.
So there must be good. There must be God. Or there must be, because I've seen the alternative. I've seen the adversary. Because it's stalking the land at the moment. The badness is visible. And that was, that's part of the sort of profound realignment that I've been going through. Or it really is just an awakening. I mean, that's a hackneyed term now, but being awakened.
Do you see it happening to others around you?
Yes, absolutely. More and more people are saying it. And it doesn't, differences are never made by the majority. Not really. That's not how it works. The crucial thing is invariably done by the one, or just a few people who are right. When you sometimes you'll be sitting at a dinner table with friends and family and whatever, and you say something and the whole place just breaks up. A great, perfect line. You just say something and everyone laughs. And if you think most often, you didn't even think of the line. You didn't compose it. It's just there and you said it. And everyone laughs because what you said, it's not just funny, it's also true.
Right.
People can instantly, true runs through people, like lightning through a lightning conductor. It runs through you and you feel it. And I think that's what's happened for a lot of people. A lot of people are able to identify very readily with what's wrong here, which is simply an inversion of natural law, that evil is trying to assert itself. Freedom is being taken from people from whom it cannot be taken, but with the ending of those people themselves. These fundamentals are happening, and I do genuinely, hand on heart, think enough people think that. Don't just think it. They know it because it's true. It's true, and people feel it.
I think what you're saying is absolutely right. True things they resonate. There's like a tuning fork inside you that starts to hum when you hear something that you know to be true. It almost doesn't need to be explained. The second you hear it, you know it. But I think there's a step from that experience to using the word God in public in the secular West. Are you hearing that more?
Yeah, definitely.
I am
definitely.
too.
And I feel good about it. And I think part of why I feel good about it is because it's coming at me in various shades. I'm being, people of Christian and Islamic faith are talking to me, and inter alia, they talk about everything, but they talk about faith and good and evil. And I hear within the Christian community, I hear from Catholic and Protestant, and they're all saying the same thing, because the only important bits of any of those messages are the same anyway, and they're all again, it's the truth. So it's striking, it's chiming with me. I can feel it because it's evidently true, and so I don't have any qualm about invoking God, because I'm pretty sure I've caught sight of the devil.
it's so interesting. Like everything, not everything, but a lot of things that I thought 20 years ago were like completely ridiculous. Now I was utterly wrong. And one of them, we were told for so long that Muslims are your enemy. And I want to say I'm not a Muslim and I'm completely opposed to mass migration, period. I don't care of anybody. I'm just against it. But it hasn't turned out that way. And I have to say, you, Galloway, of course, Russell Brand, it feels like the people who hate you the most in the UK are educated white liberals. And it feels like a lot of Muslim immigrants are open to what you're saying and agree with you. That's my impression as a foreigner. Do you feel that?
Yes, they are, because I think it's much more important just to see a person first.
Well, of course, that's true.
I know you know that, but that's the thing, and so I don't always think about this information's coming at me from a Christian or from a Muslim.
Well, in our country, I mean, it's a different experience. But after 9/11, and I'm not Muslim. I'm not going to become Muslim. I don't agree with Islam, but we were told again and again, and everybody in the world I lived in seemed to agree with it, that Muslims is Islam, that's our enemy. I don't know if you had that experience in the UK. We definitely had that here. And it's just interesting.
But again, that's all part of that divide and conquer.
Well, you're absolutely right. I just did not perceive that at mentality. The time.
Well, you've made me think about it. You know, you spent years in Washington, D.C.
Only 35, not a big deal.
I hold my hand up and say I grew up with absolute certainty that America were the good guys. I watched The West Wing, almost all of it, and I thought that, you know, as long as there's Democrats in the West Wing, you know, the white-hatted cowboys are out there making sure everything's going to be all right. Good God help me, you know that. I went, oh, Jed Bartlett, whoa, fantastic. And now I think, oh, why did I ever think that? Now, you were in the belly of the beast. What is it? What is it with these people? You know, these people that, you know, that I'm not going to, why name any names? You know, these people that have gone in skinny and come out fat with money, with lobbying and goodness and insider trading and all of the rest of it. So they've got more money than Croesus, and they're still there in their dotage, still at it. What drives it? What makes these geriatric ghouls get out of their beds?
I didn't grow up worrying about money and just being as honest as I can be. So I never really thought of money as a huge motivator in people's behavior, because it never was for me.
What's motivating these people?
Well, clearly money is part of it. I was just late to that understanding. You know, we all have blind spots and failures, and that was definitely one of mine. I didn't see how corrupt it was, because I couldn't imagine. Like, I would never say something I don't believe for money. I just would never do that. It would never even occur to me to do that. So I didn't grow up like that. So the idea that other people were saying things they knew to be untrue for money, that, like, I was shocked. It took me decades to figure out that was going on. And you would hear people say, oh, it's all about the money. And I'd be like, that's bullshit. It's not, you know, we just have different views, different ideologies, different worldviews. No, a lot of it was just about the money, and I just did not perceive that.
But how much money can a multi-millionaire have?
Well, I agree. I mean, I've never been that. Well, that is absolutely right. First of all, you know, getting out of debt, I do think is a massive blessing. And if you can get out of debt, it just means you're not controlled. And there is an inherent freedom in that. And debt is slavery. We love debt in the United States. We have a debt-based society, you know, lending money and interest. That's like the main thing that we do in the United States. I think it's disgusting. I've always thought that. So if you can get out of that, it's clearly liberation. But beyond that, like, is it going to make you happy? No. I mean, I've just lived around rich people my whole life, so I know that does not make you happy.
So if we accept that money's part, but it must be more than that. So what is the, because, you know, one does end up with fewer and fewer options when it comes to explaining what's going on. And it just feels like it, you know, it does begin to feel as if it's in the service of some kind of darkness. That's what it feels like.
Well, I mean, it is in the service of darkness. There's no kind of rational explanation for transgenderism. You know, that's just, you're sterilizing kids. There's no upside that could ever justify that. You're doing it for killing people, as, you know, the U.S. government has. I hate to say it as a patriotic American, but it's been a force for killing for a long time. What is that? And again, there's only a spiritual answer, I think, to that question. I don't see a rational one for sure. But I also think it's recognizable in a temporal framework as hubris. It's the belief that you are God, that you have greater powers than any man actually possesses, greater foresight, greater wisdom, greater power. And that is like the oldest trap there is. Like that is the story of history, is people, convincing themselves that they're more than human. And that's how you destroy yourself in the society that you lead, for sure.
And so what happens? Has the American Republic fallen? And is it
the
just
Republic
something
is long gone. I mean, the second you allow an intel agency to murder your democratically elected president, as we did 62 years ago, and then sort of ignore that it happened and be like, I don't think that's really what happened. Shut up. No, it's not a republic. If you allow unelected bureaucrats to murder the guy that the majority elected, like just by definition, the system is not what they say it is, obviously. So, but I do think I agree with you 100%, and I agree with our, long departed President Dwight Eisenhower that it really was the Second World War, in ways that I don't understand, but it's demonstrable, changed the nature of the country, changed the relationship between the population and its government. Can I just ask you a question that I always think about, but UK specific question? So 1914, the UK, England, Britain, whatever we're calling it, is running the world. And doing, I would say, a pretty good job, not perfect job, pretty good job, putting in railways and spreading Christianity and being kind of pompous, but basically being a fairly benign colonial power as colonial powers go. There's a war, 4 years. The smartest people in the country are all killed for no obvious reason. The country's really weakened by that war. The United States becomes a preeminent power in the world by 1919. So it's a huge loss for Great Britain. I would say the First World War, again, for no real reason. 20 years later, your leaders tell you, got to do it again for reasons that are clearly fake. Liberate Poland and then hand it to Stalin. That's not the reason, obviously. Democracy is not the reason. And then the country's really wrecked and the empire collapses and it becomes sad. Is there bitterness about that? Why wouldn't that be the bitterest thing that ever happened in the history of your country? Are people still, do they talk about that? They brought us into 2 wars that just destroyed us. All these cool things that we had, this great society that we had, we made the.
I think there is a lingering sadness.
But what about anger? Your leaders did that. There was no reason to join either war.
Well, the people, obviously, in my lifetime, your lifetime, the veterans of the First World War, they're all gone.
Oh, of course.
And the veterans of the Second World War, are the endangered species that they are. They are almost all on the way out. And once the people to whom it happened are gone, then that takes something with them. We're only angry with what happened at one remove, in a sense, because the people who really suffered it are gone. But I hear what you're saying about.
I was born 25 years after the war ended.
But
it's so obvious.
You could say that Britain only became a second-rate power after Suez. Which wasn't until 56. So you could say that we were, for whatever had happened to us, courtesy of the First World War and then the Second World War, it was that shit show in Suez and that humiliation, by America that Britain became only then. So
it was dead. It was dead after.
I would say it's much. I think you do make me think about something that's not unconnected. I do think that what's happening at the moment, we will not understand what has actually happened here. Maybe in 50 years' time, people look back. Maybe in 100 years' time, in the same way that I would say, someone who went through the First World War, even if they were experiencing it, even if they were in the Western Front or whatever, with the bullets flying and seeing all of the horror of it, they couldn't possibly conceptualize the impact and the consequences and the significance, and the way in which you don't live through a period and know that you might suspect that the world might be changed forever as a result of the period that you're living through, but to actually predict what will be the real consequences in 10, in 50 years' time is beyond all of us. I think it's impossible. I think part of why people won't waken up to this at the moment and won't confront it is because it's so big what's happening. I think it is going to be like a First World War.
Of course.
Someone said that the First World War was a set of iron railings between the past and everything else, because you could see the past, but you could never reach it again. And I think, but that wouldn't have been apparent right at the time. That wouldn't have been apparent even as the men were dying.
It was not. My wife's great-grandfather, whose picture is right over there, wrote a book about it, his service in France, and I've read it. Pretty great book. And it's the most cheerful book ever written. Yeah. Sort of like he was a successful guy in the United States and went over there and fight for something he didn't understand what he was fighting for, and he was in a good mood the whole time. You have no idea.
I think at some point, again, in the same time frame that we're talking about, Second World War, thereafter, I think the world fell finally into the grip of the banks. It fell finally into the grip of those unelected, unaccountable, for-profit groups for whom everything was only about money and power. And for them, they became anywheres at that point. They didn't care about. Didn't care about Britain. Didn't care about America. They just cared about money. And I think that has been. I think we lost in that slow motion consequence of the 20th century, or the first half of the 20th century. All of what had been before, that kind of love of country, that kind of patriotism, that kind of identity, I think that was unmoored, unhitched at that point, and something very large and slow moving just began to drift like a great liner that was no longer on its safe anchorage. And it's only now that with our kind of 2020 vision of hindsight that we're able to look back and see that happened.
When was the last time Britain had a leader who believed the country was more important than the banks?
Well, you'd probably have to go back to pre-1694 and the establishment of the Bank of England. I mean, that's when the Bank of England was set up, and that became the model for the Fed in 1913, and the creature of Jekyll Island, and I think, but then where do you start? The City of London was established by at the time of William the Conqueror,
of course,
and is a state within a state. That's like the Vatican. It's a separate entity. People don't fully appreciate the extent to which the City of London is not Britain. It's a separate. It's even got its own police force. The monarch has to seek permission to enter the City of London. There's a nominated person in Parliament, the city remembrancer, who most people don't notice, who's there all the time to make sure that the unique rights of the City of London are maintained and not compromised by any subsequent legislation. So there's been a long period of that. So to get back to a time before the banks had thrall, you'd have to be before the banks were given. The Bank of England was given that magical power to create fiat money. That's when all the, that's when the trouble started. Do you know about the Bradbury pound? That's the great story. Well, the what do you call it? That Abe Lincoln had, constitutional script, the greenbacks.
Yes.
During the Civil War, obviously, to get himself out of a financial hole. Well, the Bradbury pound came about in 1914 because there was a run on the banks. War was declared, and people panic, and people were going to the banks with their bits of paper, their big banknotes. I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of £5, £10, whatever. And in those days, you could actually get that transformed into gold. You could get the commensurate, the relevant bit of gold.
Yeah, it was transferable, had value,
and so the banks had a run on. Now they closed the banks, but there was an extended bank holiday. The bank went scuttling to the Treasury. David Lloyd George was the person they sought out. The the Treasury, the government must have had an inkling that it was happening, because within 3 days, legislation was rushed through Parliament. So they must have had something kind of ready to go. And they created Treasury notes. And the first Lord of the Treasury was a man called, I think it was John Bradbury anyway. And he put his signature was on these notes, and their nickname was the Bradbury Pounds. And so the banks reopened. The people were still queuing up, wanting to transfer their bank notes into gold. They were persuaded to take these Treasury notes instead. And people said, well, what's the value of these? And they were debt-free and interest-free, and they were underwritten by the notional value of Britain. Everything that Britain was or is, its creativity, its people, its labour force, its industry, everything. That's what underwrote the Bradbury pound. And for whatever reason, people accepted it. Okay, I'll take these Bradbury pounds. I'll take these Treasury notes, not bank notes, Treasury notes, interest-free, debt-free. And that saved the day. The run on the bank was averted. Now, almost at once, the banks said or realised, we can't have this. This is debt-free, interest-free mode of exchange. What's in it for us? And so very quickly, they went back to the government, said, withdraw these Bradbury pounds. Let's go back to the old days. We'll buy government bonds. We'll give you banknotes. We'll call it 3%. 3% interest, sound fair? The Bradbury pounds were I think the last one actually didn't come out of circulation until maybe in the late, many years later. I can't remember exactly when the last one came out of circulation. Britain's national debt in 1914, before the war, was about £650 million. By 1918, it was 7.5 billion, because the bankers had regained control. But for a moment, with the advent of this debt-free, interest-free Treasury note underwritten by the notional or real value of Britain, there was a currency went out into general circulation that could have changed everything. Imagine if the banks had been disempowered because they didn't have the power of debt, they didn't have the power of usury, interest, whatever you want to call it. But they realised, we're not having this. So having been got out of the hole of the run on the gold, the Bradbury pounds were taken away. Nobody noticed. There's a war on, and the national debt that began its cycling upwards.
Could crypto be a Bradbury pound?
Well, I seek to host conversations about Bitcoin and crypto from time to time. I'll make no bones about it. I'm not really sure that I properly. I'm in an expert in a position to say whether I think it's the freedom of humanity or not. I hear very strong voices on either side. People say it's a Ponzi scheme and a con and don't go near it. Other people say, no, this is the foundation upon which we will rebuild society. And somewhere between those two polar extremes must lie the truth. I think there are elements about it. Distributed ledger, blockchain. I think somewhere within there are profound solutions, because I have asked and had a vague yes whether or not you could use the blockchain protocol to have, say, a news channel that couldn't be shut down because it's peer-to-peer. The currency exchange with Bitcoin is peer-to-peer, person-to-person, without the intercedence of a bank. And hypothetically, they say yes, you could distribute information. You could transact. Bitcoin essentially is a transaction of information. So therefore, you could exchange news. You could in that way, and the people couldn't. The baddies couldn't get at it. Hypothetically, so the cryptocurrency or Bitcoin and blockchain interests me for that reason. And I although I listen to very strong voices saying don't go anywhere near Bitcoin, it's been hacked, the banks have got control of it, and so on and so on. I think somewhere within that thinking, there might be some of the answer.
How long till you get pulled off the air?
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I do genuinely. When
I mean, if you're living in a country that is trying to criminalize conversations at your dinner table between you and your kids, send you to prison for 7 years for having the wrong opinions.
I think it's a bold. Not me. I mean, I'm a small fry in these things, but I'm a minnow in swimming in these waters. But nonetheless, these are bold moves, because I think the people that are seeking the control with everything, with digital currency, with digital IDs, with all of it, are cowardly, frightened people. I think we have created an ecosystem that has enabled to thrive the most frightened, psychopathic, parasitic, cacistocratic leadership the world has yet seen. We have created the conditions for them, and we've got to take responsibility for the fact that they are our fault. You get the government you deserve.
That's true.
So we can't wash our hands of it. Nonetheless, I think they're scared. Very, very, very frightened people. And what they're most frightened of is everyone else. They're probably frightened of each other. And I think there's a line that will they cross it and do the wet work that would be required? They're operating at one remove from really hurting people physically, really going the lengths of throwing people into, gulags and concentration camps. They're not there yet. And, are they ready? Do they have the backbone to actually start? Not so much people like me, but bigger fish. Are they really going to do that? I don't know if they've really got it in them. As long as people keep
if they're proposing jail time for people who criticize them, that suggests they do have it in them.
Let's see what actually happens. I think some of it is brinkmanship, and I'm not persuaded that they've got the cojones to be the authoritarians that they fantasize about being.
Well, I mean, it depends on circumstance, right? I mean, once the virus, intentionally or not, got out of the lab in Wuhan, the COVID virus, then, they moved immediately to institute totalitarian rule. That will happen again. They're still doing gain of function research, as you well know.
But don't you think, though,
and there'll be a real virus that escapes?
But I don't think so. I'm not sure there ever was anything.
So does it strike you that the way that you think about people is influenced by Freud and by people who think about human behavior in non-chemical terms, in moral, spiritual terms? That whole way of thinking has kind of disappeared. I mean, that was a feature of our childhoods where people would say, well, you have unresolved issues, guilt, whatever. You didn't live up to your own standards. You take that with you. Now it's like you've got a chemical imbalance. Like we can't even... Yeah. I don't think young people can even analyze human behavior in those terms.
I think it's part and parcel of an anti-human agenda.
Yes.
That what has been done fundamentally is anti-human. And it's being done to people who see no inherent... They don't know what it means to be human and alive. And therefore they can be casual and contemptuous of people in a count of billions. Because they have got away from the sovereign human being.
That's right.
And what it means. We've barely floated a dugout canoe onto the Pacific Ocean of the unknown as the human consciousness. But we've already got the transhumanists, not the transgender, the transhumanists, who are already preaching that the human being Mark 1 is suboptimal and needs an upgrade via, technology. They want to blend humans with tech, digitized, ersatz human beings, because the time of the biological human is apparently over. But that's a product of the wrong kind of people, not even asking what it means to be human and alive.
Right. Well, it's a rebellion against God too. I mean, if, as Christians certainly, but I think Muslims and Jews also, certainly Jews do, believe that human beings were created in God's image to deface that image is to attack God, right? And so to declare people inherently inadequate, that's a theological concept, I think.
It's bound up with many, as I say, it's going to be 100 years or more, but obviously, like in 1968, Paul Ehrlich wrote The Population Bomb.
Yeah.
And at the same time, actually, Garrett Hardin wrote The Tragedy of the Commons.
Yes.
And they both speculated about the basic crapness and rubbishness of people in large numbers. They'll just make a mess of everything. And it was that return of that neo-Malthusian approach to people. There's too many of them and they're not worth having anyway. So this is going to be the ending of us. And the predictions of Ehrlich and so on were wrong. You got it completely wrong. And I talk to people, I interview people all the time who are saying, and you'll be across this, that birth rates are plummeting across the West. It's not just in the West. Japan is poised to disappear in 100 years. There won't be any Japanese people.
That's right.
So it's not even a Western phenomenon. Swathes of populations are not producing enough people to keep themselves going. It's true in Britain and France, all across Europe. It's true in America. It's really bad in America. People are having like 1.4, 1.5 children on average, which is not enough to sustain.
No.
And people are not appreciating that they are sitting in the cheap seats on a plane that is in a tailspin that may not be possible even if you could get to the controls to pull the plane back into level flight. It may have gone beyond that point. And so you've got that information out there at the same time as people like Bill Gates and others are saying we've got to check the human population. We've got too many people. And in 100 years' time, there's not going to be anybody here. Well, I'm using hyperbole, but populations are in steep decline. And it's the explanations for it are existential. It has to do with maybe possibly falling fertility, and God knows what we've done to fertility with these products that we've jammed into several billion people. We'll see what the fertility consequences of all that are in due course.
I think we know. But in any event, there's also people delaying having children, and then when so many women when they do reach a point where they do want to have children, they're now in maybe their mid-30s, their late 30s. The relevant partner is not there at the right time, and so they miss that. So there's all sorts of existential reasons, societal reasons for the plummeting. But they got to work at a consulting firm in the ensuing years. That's not enough.
But what I'm saying is that we know this, and yet the Malthusians are still out there banging the drum for fewer people. They can't get rid of people fast enough. They can't quickly enough deter people from having more people.
Isn't that genocide? Isn't that what that is?
Yeah, it's anti-species. And again, it's coming down to people, I think, who are not properly invested in the future, and they're certainly not invested in the future of humankind. They're not giving their last measure of devotion
but
to
there's
making
like a gut
sure
level
there's people
hate. So there's a football player, you probably haven't followed this, but in the United States, kicker, who gave us a college commencement speech the other day, and in it he said,
I did. Trudy and I watched it this morning. Oh, by chance, we watched it online.
Now you're deeply steeped in the politics of the United States, but then you saw how moderate it was. He's like, as you grow older, you might want to have kids because that's a source of enduring joy. And all these politicians and cultural figures, and I can't remember that chick's name, but Taylor Swift, some sort of fake entertainer, gets out there and, denounces the guy as a Neanderthal and as evil because he suggests that having children may be more rewarding than your stupid career. What is that impulse? Why would you be mad at someone for encouraging young people to have children? That's very weird to me.
I was listening to Jordan Peterson years ago. I mean, I'm not claiming that as any badge of honor or anything. It's just a fact. I was listening way before everything that's happening at the moment. I came across him years and years ago. I think it was courtesy of, the Joe Rogan experience. He was part of the intellectual dark web. Remember the Sam Harris, Brett Weinstein, Heather Heying, and Jordan Peterson, and so on. And I remember being really very profoundly struck by a lot of the things that Peterson had to say about children and parenthood. And for example, I really remember him saying that so many people say they don't want to have a baby because it's going to interfere with their lifestyle. And he said, I really have to ask, what kind of lifestyle is it that you can't take a baby with you? And I thought, because Trudy and I, we had our first, and then we've got 3. They always came with us. They just were there. Then there were 2 of them, and there were 3 of them, and they just went everywhere. It didn't impinge on anything, and obviously it goes without saying that it made our lives by inexpressible orders of magnitude richer. And yet, but the abiding message out there is that, oh no, there's better things to do than be families. That's anti-human at the basal level.
Well, so then I want to ask you just finally about one of the great trends in the West, and it is only in the West, is the climate hysteria. How do you assess that? That seems part of this larger whole.
It's a hoax.
It's a hoax in what sense?
It's multifaceted. The climate is changing because that's what the climate does.
Yep.
Like weather, the climate changes.
We did have glaciers at one point.
Yeah, when they started measuring temperature, we were just coming out of the Little Ice Age.
Yes,
which had lasted for hundreds of years, and temperatures were as low on planet Earth as they'd been for thousands of years at that point. So when it comes to measuring temperature, there was only really one way unless we were going to go extinct or go straight into another full ice age, there was only one way for the temperatures to go, which was up. And so the fact that there has been sustained increase in temperature, well, it would be because it was coming from the bottom of the well. The only way was up. Also, it used to be accepted fact that increasing carbon dioxide follows a rise in temperature. It doesn't cause it.
Right.
As the world gets warmer, there's a kind of a several 100-year lag, and then there's more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as a consequence of that warming. And so to tell people that carbon dioxide is causing the increase in temperature would be like seeing a horse and cart on a road from space and imagining that the cart was pushing the horse because you could see it moving. That would be how wrong you are. It's the horse pulling the cart. And likewise, CO2, there's more of it once the planet's warmer. By I think it's 800 years is the lag. So that there are all sorts of reasons for being aware that this way in which people are being frightened into thinking that there's a catastrophic apocalypse coming because they've got gas central heating and they drive fossil fuel cars is a hoax. There's a big complicated picture to do with the climate changing. It used to be called, in the 70s, I remember the documentary with Leonard Nimoy.
Very well.
Talking about, we were getting into an ice age. That was just the 70s. And then it became global warming. But then because that isn't holding up, it's become climate change. Well, yeah, of course climate changes. And then in any event, what's being done in response to it is not green and it's anti-human. As advocates of fossil fuels say, if we are, let's say we are going into a time of climate uncertainty and instability, that would be the very time you wouldn't want to do away with the ability to cheaply and readily heat homes or air condition them.
That would be true.
As appropriate. I mean, if something's going to happen, this would be you do not throw away your matches, at the time when you might need to light a fire. And also the wind turbines that now are at the end of their life cycle and they're just being landfilled. These vast, unrecyclable plastic things are just being buried in the ground. They're being made in any event using fossil fuels. They can't be recycled. Electric cars, that's just a means to get people out of their cars and back onto, I don't know, horses or Shanks's pony or whatever. So it's not green what is being done. The planet, we're making a mess. Look what happens in the extraction of the lithiums and other rare earth metals that are required for electric batteries. Look at the child slavery that entails. Look at the scarification of the planet that's involved in the extraction of those things. The destruction of ecosystems and habitats in pursuit of green energy. Really? Seriously? And the one clean green energy that is available, which is nuclear, is strictly verboten because we've been told that you can't have nuclear energy.
So in Europe, you've seen a spate of climate cultists destroying medieval art. It's never modern art; it's always Christian art. But I've noticed, but they've gone into museums and spray painted or slash paintings. I don't think you've seen any vandalism of private planes at all. So if you believe in the kind of schematic, if you believe in the story of climate change as an existential threat, the first thing you would do is get rid of private air travel. But that doesn't occur to anybody. I don't understand. Like, what is that? What are we watching?
Well, you've got that bizarre situation where the rich at the World Economic Forum in Davos and other places are openly saying that because of carbon credits, us rich people will buy the carbon credits of poor people that can't afford to go on holiday anyway, and that will offset our private jets and private yachts. You're not using your carbon credits anyway because you can barely afford to feed yourself or your family. So you're definitely not going on holiday this year. So I'll take your carbon credits off your hand, and I'll use that to legitimize the perpetuation of my luxurious lifestyle. The hypocrisy of it, the rubbing of people's noses in it, is off the scale. And again, it's anti-human. If for want of the kind of farming techniques and the fertilizers that we have, there's very good reason for thinking that half the world's population will starve to death for want of the kind of fertilizers that are made from oil. So the Just Stop Oil.
So you're going to see famines. I don't think there's any doubt about that soon. And when that happens, will people blame each other as they've been instructed to do, or will they finally figure out that this is all manufactured?
Well, I think, again, being absolutely, it being an inalienable responsibility to be positive, I would have to answer yes to that question, that more people do. Well, I can say for one, I see it now and I didn't used to. So I've added to the count by 1. And Trudy sees it and she didn't used to, so that's 2. And our kids do, so that's 5. So just in my immediate circle, I'm seeing people waking up on a very personal level. So yes, I do think that enough people are seeing the way in which we are being played. We are being a galactic scale attempt to pull the wool over our eyes is going on. And more people are seeing it. And they're seeing that people are being uprooted from their homelands and have been for generations. And they are turning up where they, maybe oughtn't to be. And instead of people pausing for a moment to think, why is this disruption happening? They just get angry with the victims of it. And I'm not saying I'm sure there are bad lads and criminals and absolutely the sort of people of whatever creed and colour that you wouldn't want in your communities. I get that absolutely.
But they wouldn't be here if the governments and NGOs hadn't brought them here.
But the bigger picture is, look at they're building a bridge in the Darien Gap to make it easier for the NGOs and the WHO and the UN and the rest of them to drive people into the United States from the south. If you can, as I say, I'm seeing it, and more people are seeing it. And all it really takes is for people to realise that the trouble is not beside you, it's above you. And it's not a big group. And actually their techniques are old, worn out, and transparent from overuse. And there's nothing to fear but the fear they sow, I would say.
I can't believe that I am more pessimistic than a Scot.
Well, you've probably got Scottish genes.
I do.
But that's a zero-sum game, Tucker. You've got to it's like taking your castor oil. It's like taking you've got to be optimistic, because it's your obligation. It's nothing less than your obligation to force yourself to be optimistic. You cannot go to the dark side until it's all over. In which case it won't matter anyway. But I don't think so.
Neil Oliver, thank you on that. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Tucker Carlson.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. We hope you'll subscribe to it. And by the way, you can hit the little bell on there and get notifications every time we produce a video. We hope you'll do that also.